So this video is about death. So it's a touchy subject, of course, but it's something that came up for me recently, and so I thought I'd speak about it. So, you know, the thing is, how do you prepare for death, right? I mean, it is inevitable. It is a part of life. We will, eventually, at least for most people, unless you're like super spiritually advanced, you will see your end of days, right? I mean, these bodies have a shelf life. And so, I guess, like the story of how I came to this, to be at peace with death is that, so like for myself, I've come to a place in my life where I am practicing self-love and really putting myself first. It has come from learning about what it is to be an artist by reading the books, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. And so, through this, I've learned that, if you are an artist, and a lot of artists are very sensitive, and they like, where do songs come from? How are you just picking up on this stuff? How do you get inspired by these things and feel like you need to express them, that you need to put it into this thing so that it's out of you, and like it's a weird thing being an artist, right? And I used to think that there was something wrong with me. Now I get it, that it's just called being an artist, right? And so I've learned through these teachings that self-care is, it's not an option when you are sensitive. When you're really sensitive, you have to take care of yourself first, always, and it's very important to do so, right? But it's funny because, like, so for as myself, as a sensitive individual, I'm always thinking about other people. I want to be of service to other people. I want to help other people, not necessarily fix, but I certainly want to offer anything that I have that could be of use for other people. That's why I do these YouTube videos and all this kind of stuff. Like, I don't get anything out of it, but there's this drive to be of service and to share and to help and to offer help anyways, like. And so it's a funny thing, like walking that path, and like myself as a spiritual person and as a yogi, I mean, it's who I am and it's what I do, right? And so, but just like realizing how much of my time and energy really goes into trying to do things for other people, trying to be of service and always wanting to be of help, right? And it was just like I reached a point during a ceremony of on Beltane, so like on May 1st, not too long ago, where I just thought about it, and it's like, you know what? I sometimes talk to God or the creator or whatever, you could call it praying or whatever, but it's really just me expressing myself. And, I reached a point where I just said, like, maybe I don't need to finish writing my book. Maybe I don't need to have spiritual gatherings. Maybe I don't need to make music and release it in the world so that people can enjoy it. Maybe I don't need to make YouTube videos. Maybe I don't, need to teach yoga. Maybe I don't need to, do other things all along those lines, because why? Like, where is this coming from? This desire to be of service, right? And it's like, something that the Buddha said is like, was it, desire is like the root of all suffering, right? And it's like, well, I think about my own life sometimes, and it's like, well, like all of my greatest concerns these days, because I have achieved health, I've come full circle with my diet, I'm doing really well. I'm doing okay in life, right? I don't have like a lot of money or like fancy car or any of that kind of stuff, or but I'm doing okay for just a dude, right? And so um yeah, like, and I just, when I think about it, it's like all of my concerns are to do with basically art based stuff, like, because I am learning to play the guitar and the piano and drumming and music production and singing and as a writer and like just all of these things and making these videos and writing a book and all these things, and it's just like, so I just had to sit back and say, like, why do I put myself through all of this? And I know part of it has to do with like being a Cancer. It's, people who are of that sun sign have this, this inner need to, or want to take care of other people and to make sure other people feel comfortable and are happy. It's just a part of, I don't know, my energetic makeup in this life. And so, but just thinking about it, it's just like, it was like a process of surrendering to this stuff. It's like, maybe I don't need to do all this stuff. Maybe I can. And so I said to the Lord, I said, you know what? I've given her. I've given her every day of my life. In every relationship I've tried to make it work. I've really put in efforts. I've done everything that I can, like and 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 it's just like, it just never ends, like every day that you wake up, you have to essentially keep going. You got to put one foot in front of the other. You got to make a plan. You got to execute it. You got to do stuff. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to, move forward in your life and whatnot in some way, like you just got to do it, right? And it can be exhausting, sometimes when I look at, what it takes for me to live, because I make my own bed, but to do that, and I don't know how to stop, right? I don't know how to stop playing the guitar because it's important to me. I don't know how to stop playing the piano. I can't stop working. I can't stop making music. I can't stop writing. Can't stop making YouTube videos. I can't stop writing poetry. Like, I can't stop buying new musical instruments, like ridiculous things. Look at this thing here. Like, it's just nonstop. All of these things that require attention and effort and patience and discipline, and like they require learning and research and practice and experience and conversations, and just, it's just like, sometimes it's just like, I've had enough, and it doesn't mean that I want to kill myself. It's not that at all. But when it's just, sometimes it's frustrating because it's like, despite any of my redeeming qualities, I still, I'm struggling a lot, in a lot of different ways. I'm constantly overcoming hurdles of all sorts, but at the same time, still challenged, life is challenging, right? And so, I said to the Lord in this ceremony, I said, I gave her, I really did. My whole life, I've always made an effort. I've always tried to do better. I've always tried to be a good person, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I've tried so many things, right? And and I do believe that the things that I'm doing will pan out, right? I don't think that I've been led to do any of these things because essentially like the universe or God wants to waste my time and lead me down to barking up the wrong tree, down the wrong path, right? It's the opposite. I feel the opposite of that. But just because there comes a time sometimes when it's, when you're just having some feels, and it's like, I've thought to myself, I said, like, if I don't wake up in the morning, I'm okay with it. Like I don't feel so attached to life, to living, like to being alive physically, that I would be okay if it was time for me to move into spirit, because I know that this isn't the end. And that's part of that's part of being ready for death, is having that spiritual understanding, because it is a thing. Some people have looked into it, some people had experiences, and like when you look at all of the, say, literature, or just like the knowledge and stuff like that around that subject, and versus about death and about spirituality and about all that kind of stuff, spiritual stuff, versus what is the other side, fear and ignorance, just meaning not knowing, and you know what I mean. So like you have to choose, right? And that's why it really helps to do your research and to look into stuff, because it allows you to then make your mind up about how you feel it all in a lot better way. And so it's something that my guru, who is Paramahansa Yogananda, it's something that happens within certain spiritual traditions, within Buddhism and within yoga as well, that sometimes when a person has done their work, like for example, Yogananda, he attained a level of self-realization. He reached a certain state of like awakened consciousness, where he was able to shift his awareness into an omnipresent state of consciousness, and able to tap into other dimensions and things like that, right? So like and he had a following. He wrote like a book, essentially. He wrote his book, and then he wrote a teaching as well, to sort of accompany, or like he left like a proper teaching, and that is what I read the book, and then I chose to study with them, right? And so, but when he came, I guess he reached a point in his life, I can't tell you his exact age, but he was like my age. He was in great health because he was a yogi, and he was a peaceful person and spiritual, and lived an amazing life, right? And became this great spiritual teacher, and he did all this stuff. And then one day he said to his followers, he said, at a big dinner, you know, I'm done. You know, I've done all that I can do, and I'm ready to transition into spirit, because this is the physical, um, uh, like physical world. Physical reality is just one element of what is available, and it is not. It's yeah, just like how when you go to sleep and you dream and stuff like that, that is clearly another aspect of life, where you have experiences, but in a non-physical way. And, there's a saying, as above, so below, as below, so above. So they say, like, in the spirit realm, it is timeless and spaceless. So it's just, but also, like, the same sort of relationships are present. So the people that here and stuff like that, the people that you've interacted with and been involved with and stuff like that, it's the same but different, if you know what I mean, right? So, and then there's the astral planes and all this kind of stuff, right? So it's like, this is by no means the end. And apparently that's what Jesus meant, Yeshua, when he said, what was it? Forgive them, for they know not. Or no, what was it? The point is because was to show people that, like, when he came back, that isn't the end. Like, when your physical body ceases to be housing, to be animated in the way that we understand, right? Because it's tricky with the spiritual understanding, because I can't say it. I can't say that my soul lives in my body, because I've heard it explained otherwise. It's the opposite. Your body lives inside of your soul, in the same way that when you're having a dream and you're walking around, that individual that is within the dream that is taking place in the mind of a greater being, right? So it's the same thing. Our body lives in our soul, right? But that's getting, that's a bit much for this conversation, right? But I mean, so that's the thing. So it's like, okay, there's nothing to worry about. I certainly don't worry about dying. I came to this understanding a long time ago that it's like, I could get hit by a bus. I could fall asleep at the wheel when I'm driving my car any day, or somebody else could, and run into you, right? Like, you have zero control over so many factors like that. And I just said to myself, I absolutely refuse to spend a single moment being afraid or being worried about dying or death or what could happen to me. It's just like, whatever happens, so be it. There's so many things going on, simultaneously, that it's just like, for me, it doesn't make any sense to be concerned in any way whatsoever about things like that, because it is completely out of my hands. What is in my hands? Do I pay attention when I'm driving? Of course I do. Do I jump out of planes? No, I've never jumped out of a plane. I do err on the side of caution, because I do like my life and being alive, and and what I'm doing and whatnot, right? I mean, it's not the worst by any means, right? I'm pretty lucky, I would say. That's a funny term, but in the colloquial sense, like, for what it's worth, yeah, I'm not, I'm doing all right, and I take care of my health. I eat healthy, like, I take care of my body. I do practices that keep me safe at work. I wear all of my PPE all of the time. I keep myself protected, like, but, you know, at the same time, there is a lot that's out of your hands and stuff, like people, my mom died of cancer a few years ago. Was it preventable? I don't know. I have no idea. But it certainly wasn't possible to save her, like, when her time was up, and this was sort of a conversation. I went to Amsterdam when she was in her last few weeks, and spent those weeks with her until she passed. And and we talked about things like this, because it is a scary thing when you don't know, when you didn't look into it, because who looks into that kind of stuff? It's not exactly normal to to do research projects on death and like to come to terms with it. I have just, for myself, it's something that I've just been exposed to over and over and over. A lot of people in my life have died, all my grandparents and my mother and my stepmother and probably like a dozen or 2 dozen friends, and just like it's something that happens. And I remember the first time I it was really hard because I didn't know how to relate to it, right? And ever since then I've slowly been building a different understanding about it. And yeah, now I walk this spiritual sort of path, and like I said, I really felt like I came to terms with the fact that, just like being okay with whatever happens, and when I said that, I was very serious. I wasn't it wasn't a joke. You don't just say stuff like that, because I know that stuff that, like I said, with my guru, he said he was done at a dinner, and then I can't remember if he just sat down and then left his body, or if he went to sleep and didn't wake up. But that was his last day on this earth in that way. And it was the same thing with his guru and his guru's guru. And so, I mean, and I think there's a guy, Songyal Rinpoche, same deal. It is a thing, the ability to leave the body at will when a person feels that their work is done and stuff like that. So, like it's a serious thing. When I said this stuff, I thought about it, for a moment. I was like, wow. And so I told my dad that of what I was going through, and I said, like, it's not that I want to die, right? That's not it at all. It's just that, I am ready to expand, and I'm not attached to life, because I know that this isn't all that there is. And so I guess it's sort of like a process of surrendering. And so I think that's, a part of what anybody would have to do, in order to come to terms with the fact that they're dying. My uncle died this not long ago, and it was a pretty difficult thing for the family, because he was a central masculine figure in the family, but he had Parkinson's, and then he got dementia, and it was really bad. And he'd be seeing things, he'd be like, holy cow, what are all these people doing here? And it's like, there's nobody here. And so it's super frustrating, because you can't tell the difference between what other people are experiencing and what you're experiencing. I don't want to say that it doesn't exist, because I think that there's something to it, right? But I mean, and then he lost his ability to be continent. Like once you can't control your bowels anymore, and you can't tell what's real for what it's worth, and he was just like, I'm done, and he made his peace, and he transitioned. He got the maid service, because he just wasn't having fun anymore, and that's I guess part of it, right? It's like, when you're not having fun, sometimes you feel like giving up. It's like, it's just too much work. Like, why? And so yeah, I guess, like, just to wrap this up, I would say that, like, for myself, being comfortable with the idea of death has to do with having done my best, and like just recognizing that like, even though I've screwed up all kinds of stuff, I did my best, and how could anything be expected more of you? Like we're brought into this world blind, you know. We don't get to choose what we're taught as truth or shown as way. We just have to kind of deal with whatever gets handed to us. And you know, we become these people and we have experiences and stuff like that, and it's like so much of it is not, you know, it's kind of out of your control, right? I mean, there's different ways to look at it all, right? But I mean, um yeah, it's sort of a, it's a, it's a funny, yeah, it's a tricky thing. And the other thing was to also, like, yeah, having a spiritual understanding, it really helps. Um, Having essentially, you know, what a spiritual understanding to me is basically just analogies, you know, because you can, like, I don't mean reading a bunch of books and this and that. I mean, that kind of stuff might help, but, you know, the analogy of the dream is very powerful for myself, where it's like when you're lying down in bed at, you know, and you're having a dream, you have all kinds of experiences, and you experience a landscape and there's other people there, and you do things, but fundamentally what's taking place is, you know, in the mind of a greater, of a sort of a greater self, which is the you that's in bed. And that small portion of you is, it's not like it nothing dies. Like when you wake up, you move on with your life, and it's not a concern about who you were when you were dreaming, having an experience. It's not, it's a non-issue, right? So it certainly helps to have certain analogies like that to ponder, to pull from, and, you know, yeah, to think about, and so that you can relate to them. And certainly, um yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I don't want to die, you know, and I'm glad that I've been given more days. You know, I realize post that experience that, you know, I was just having a moment, right? But it was a moment of surrender. It was a moment of letting go. It was a moment of expression. It was a moment of acknowledgement. It was a moment of um you know, of acceptance, and just yeah, just yeah. So I don't know if that helps anybody, right? I mean, I felt like making this video because it happened. And, you know, recently I had a friend told me, you know, I was talking about my YouTube journey, and he said that your content is just too deep for YouTube. People want cat videos, and I get it, right? So, but whatever. Yeah. It's not a fear of death. It's not a fear of life. You know, like I said, I love my life. It's getting better every day. It was just about not being attached and just being okay with it and letting go. You know, and somehow, in some weird way, it helped. You know, it's weird. How does just being okay with stuff help? I don't know, but I feel more, because I had that experience, because I went through what I did. I feel better, oddly, you know, just the fact that I allowed myself to go there. and to say those things and to have those feelings and thoughts and stuff like that in that conversation. So I don't know.